right. Good evening to you all. Good afternoon. Good morning to you all. And thank you once again for joining us this evening. We're excited that you've joined us again for our second round of the Innovation Boot Camp, which we started a month back, and we managed to run our first round of business idea competition, and our winner came through, and we are back again. And the aim is to continue learning more about how to build a sustainable business. Last week, we had Professor Bennett, and he managed to answer some questions and give advice on how to build a great business model. And this is all thanks to the effort of E4Impact Foundation, passionate about knowledge transfer and bringing you information on our programs that are across all our partners in 18 African countries that we are in. I am so excited today to be joined by Dr. Wentzel, John Wentzel. Welcome, Dr. John Wentzel.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. John Wentzel is currently the CEO of the AdCorp Group, and today he joins us on his capacity as the CEO as well as his capacity as an academic. I will introduce him in full a little bit later on. But like I said, we are running a series of these innovation boot camps. We've done how to build a business, how to build a sustainable business model, and you can find it on all our social media pages, on our YouTube channel, the session from last week. This week, we look at what are investors looking for? What are investors looking for? Please go to all our channels. You'll be able to find more information. And here we have our program leaders present, and especially in the countries where we are launching the program with or new editions in our partner universities. So before we carry on, I would just want to give you a brief background of who we are and what our programs are and where they are. So I'll share my screen. Okay. Right, I hope you can all see that very clearly. Right, so E4Impact, we are passionate about impact entrepreneurship, and we are passionate to train the new generation of impact entrepreneurs. Our vision is to create the largest alliance of universities that are offering a quality education in an MBA, through an MBA, global MBA in entrepreneurship, and a international certificate in entrepreneurship. We do also have accelerators where we offer other workshops on entrepreneurship and how to build the skills and learn the tools to become an entrepreneur of note. So we are a spin-off of the Catholic University of Milan and the Graduate Business School Altus. We are here to promote impact entrepreneurship, and we are currently in 18 African countries where we partner with universities with the same vision and passion. And we support our impact and work together with our alliance partners by having local faculty and international faculty carry out programs and do lectures, and currently online or in class or in a blended approach. And we're very keen to develop partnerships and market relations and linkages with institutions or organizations or associations that focus on entrepreneurship and development of entrepreneurs, and also especially to develop links with organizations, companies in Italy and in Europe and across the world. There are many advantages to join the E4Impact family. As alumni, as students, you have access to platforms to seek investment, to seek finance, to grow your businesses from idea stage. We work with entrepreneurs that are at idea stage. We work with entrepreneurs at startup stage and at growth stage. So it doesn't matter what age, it doesn't matter what gender you are, you're most welcome into our programs and be able to access entrepreneurs and investors of note. We have a growing alumni across Africa in all our partners. Most of our editions are definitely more than 5 years old, and 85 of our alumni are running successful business. We're in the 2 years of the longest program, that's our MBA. They have grown and become job creators, where you find entrepreneurs growing their enterprises and employing more people by the end of the program. We work with financial institutions, individual business angel investors who are able to coach, mentor the programs and expose them to more or networks that are able to build their businesses and increase their turnover. Strategic partners, we are very passionate about. We have sealed over 2.6 plus 2.6 of strategic partners with development partners, with private sector partners, public partners, anyone who is interested in partnering with us with the vision of growing entrepreneurship and providing entrepreneurs who solve problems in Africa is welcome on board. Our programs are very flexible, understanding the current situation of entrepreneurs pre and post-COVID, or we're not yet in post-COVID, but pre-COVID and during COVID times. We have very flexible programs, mostly run over weekends and after hours. Our lectures are very practical and hands-on, with a lot of actionable tools that allow you to iterate and create habits that allow you to grow your business. And coaching and mentoring through our huge network of international, local, and regional partners allows us to gain a database of coaches and mentors. Within ourselves, we have the Business Coach Academy, where each program in each country has a business coach attached who is able to coach all our students throughout the whole process. Access to investors, as mentioned, locally, regionally, internationally. And we have a business summit that is held in Milan, where we encourage our students to go and meet other entrepreneurs in the different countries, as well as meet entrepreneurs in Italy. So you can have the B2B fair in Milan. And also our programs have dual, especially the MBA program has a dual accreditation, where you get a certificate from the local partner and the alliance partner. So we're very passionate about gender, and we ensure that our programs have a substantial percentage of women joining, and we encourage women to build entities of note where they are able to create jobs and create jobs for themselves as well. We're passionate about the youth, and we target our programs to be able to impact the future generation of Africa. Right now, we are currently enrolling for new editions in Ethiopia. We are starting in July 2021. We've got Mekedela, who's our program leader there, area manager there, and he's able to be able to, if you're able to contact him, put your details in the chat room. Please, if you have any questions, ask them in the chat room. We'll be able to avail even program leaders and area managers from other areas of Africa. In Rwanda, June 2021, an edition has just kicked off. If you are in Rwanda and you want to quickly join, please go and speak to Benjamin. In Eswatini, we've got an edition starting in 2021, phone Sandile or email Sandile. In Ghana, we've got edition starting in October 2021. You can phone Andrews. And in Egypt, we've got the mini MBA Impact Entrepreneurship at the Innovation Hub starting in September 2021 with Farida. You can contact Farida for more information. In South Africa, in July, right around the corner, we've got Chwane Business School for Business and Society kicking off the first edition in July 2021. So please put your details. If you want more details about our other centers across Africa, you can go ahead. So follow us on Facebook. We are on LinkedIn. We are on Instagram. We are on Twitter. We are sharing information on entrepreneurship. We're sharing skills. We're sharing contacts. We're sharing information on how to build a sustainable ecosystem to build impact entrepreneurs. So, right. Let's move on to the most exciting part of the evening, where we get to hear from Dr. Wentzel as he shares his knowledge and experience. I'm always talking about the 3 E's: education, experience, and expertise. And I can definitely guarantee you that today we have an expert in our midst. And Dr. Wentzel, like I said, is a highly qualified senior business executive, currently the CEO of Adbot Group. He is also a visiting faculty at Gordon Institute Business Science, GIBS, at the University of Pretoria, and a previous research associate at the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. And he currently teaches at GIBS. And he also sits on faculty advisory boards with the Department of Industrial Engineering and Systems at the University of Pretoria. So he's passionate about knowledge transfer in building technology-enabled businesses in emerging markets. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Dr. Wentzel. I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bertha, for that wonderful and gracious introduction. A warm welcome to everyone who is attending. I'm just going to share my screen, so you can just bear with me as I work my way through this. And let us just get the slideshow going.
We can see your slides.
Hopefully everyone can see that.
Perfect, we can see your slides. Go ahead.
Super. So when we talk about sort of what investors are looking for, I think it's also useful just to get a perspective of my experience. Bertha's spoken a little bit about that, and I think when you're getting information from someone or someone you're sharing, it's always useful to get a perspective. You know, where are they coming from? What experience do they have? So I've been in business for more than 25 years now. And in respect of the businesses, I've been both on the buy side and the sell side. And that is where businesses have approached companies, or in my private capacity, or businesses that I'm involved with, seeking investment. So that's on the buy side, and also on the sell side, where we've been a seller or been looking for investors for businesses that we held or were part of. That experience that I've got has been gained right across Africa. And my experience in business stretches from South Africa all the way to Dubai. And in fact, I first met Bertha when I was doing business in Zimbabwe. So that experience on buy side and sell side goes all the way through to Dubai and Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and East Africa, West Africa, and Central Africa. It covers both listed, unlisted, and private equity. Those 2 points are important because when you look at trying to find someone to invest in your business, each country is different. Each culture is different. So there's never, ever a single solution. The way you would seek investment in Egypt is fundamentally different to the way you would seek investment in Nigeria. It's different to South Africa. So it's important to bear that in mind. There's no single answer. There's no single tool that you apply in every situation. And it's the same with listed, unlisted, and private equity. The investment narrative, the methodology is different for each one of those entities, depending on where you are seeking your investment. The approach that I've taken, and there are many perspectives on this, but the approach that I've taken is to focus on the commercial component. So not specifically looking at NGOs or that kind of business, even though when one seeks investment as an NGO or a not-for-profit entity, the points are actually surprisingly similar to commercial. But measuring the return becomes a little bit more difficult because someone who's investing in an NGO may have a different perspective of what constitutes a return on that investment compared to a commercial investor. And today's talk will focus more on the commercial side, and it will also focus on the traditional investment side. There are alternative, today one would call them non-traditional channels, and maybe in the future they will become traditional channels. And these are sort of the crowdfunding or the subscription-based raising of investment. So my talk today covers the traditional channels, which is where you are approaching an investor or a consortium, but not specifically on the non-traditional side. So that's a little bit about my perspective, where I come from, and just positioning where we focus in today's talk on. So when one looks at the question, you've got a business, you've started a business, it's going well. Investment requirements often change, as you would know, depending on where you are in the life cycle of the business. Often when you have an idea, you're seeking investment, and that's probably the hardest place to start to get investment, because you are selling an idea. And that's a different kind of investment. Then you get the early stage investor, where often entrepreneurs, and this is the bulk of entrepreneurs, they have a passionate idea and they are willing to put their own money in, whether it's taking their pension fund, whether it's remortgaging the house, whether it's their life savings. They put that in because they passionately believe in that. But at some point, in order to scale the business or for other reasons, they're looking for an investor. And they're early stage investors, and they are late stage investors. And then as the business matures and you're getting to the point where you've built this business up, there's a different type of investor. So there are different types of investors at different stages in your business life cycle and business maturity. And let's just have a look at some of those, because when you seek investment, it's important to understand that not all investors are the same. Each investor's got a different perspective, and they've got a different set of requirements or needs. So one cannot approach this business of investing by taking the same approach to all potential investors. And I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with the types of investors that appears on this slide. The angel investor is often an early stage investor. And you may get lucky and approach an angel investor and say, look, I've got a great idea, but I've got no money to give effect to this idea. So angel investors tend to be either an individual or an entity that provides investment at the startup phase. And these investors often look for the unicorn. They know that they're going to invest in a portfolio of early startup businesses. There is a very good chance that the bulk of those businesses will fail. They have a portfolio approach, and therefore they are taking the bet that your business may be the one that turns into the next unicorn. And therefore their demand returns are actually quite onerous. It's not atypical for these kinds of investors to seek a financial return of 50 or 60%, but they are willing to lose their investment. So angel investors typically will invest, but they will know that many of the investments will actually just flounder and they won't get their money back. The second category of investor is your private investor. And your private investor is often your best initial funding. That's your best bet when you start out early, when you're not well established, when you don't have a flourishing business. And these are friends or family or even colleagues who believe in you, believe in your idea, and are willing to put their money in. And the private investors, their return is often more nebulous, because often they are doing it because they know you personally. A couple of years ago, the private investment company that I started many years ago invested in a business called FinTech. They do bank money, they do clearinghouse software, and that's what they build. And I invested in FinTech, or my company invested in FinTech, because the founder was someone who'd worked for me. And I knew the founder very well. And you often get your private investor investing on the basis that they know the person, i.e. yourself, and their returns a little bit, they're less stringent on the returns because they're investing in you. Private equity is the most common source of investment funding. And a private equity institution is a fund that's raised cash from institutions or from private investors. And they are looking to deploy that cash on behalf of their underlying investors into businesses in anticipation of getting a superior return. So you will see globally that private equity businesses sit with enormous amounts of cash, and they're looking to deploy that cash. And that's good for a business to go to private equity and say, look, I'm keen for you to invest in this business. Private equity investors have an exit cycle. And sometimes I see entrepreneurs don't fully understand that. So I've been involved in private equity as well. They will invest in a business, but they will want to see a return, typically in a 5 to 7 year cycle, which means at the end of 5 to 7 years, they want to sell. And that's how they make their money. And that's often a cause of conflict with entrepreneurs who have a longer term vision. And initially entrepreneurs get excited, but the pressure from private equity around getting an exit can be quite onerous. So Private equity, there's lots of cash. They're probably the best place to go and get investment. However, they do require a return, and they often have an exit cycle. And that cycle is typically 5 to 7 years, depending on the fund. And then there are two other types of investor. One is your corporate investor. And your corporate investor, it would be a big business looking to invest in smaller businesses. And the corporate investor, I often use the term, the corporate investor is the elephant in the bed syndrome. The elephant in the bed syndrome is, I often caution people, don't get into bed with an elephant, because during the night they're going to roll over and squash you. And corporate players often structure deals that are quite complex. If they invest in your business, you are becoming part of their portfolio. They may not be as passionate about your idea, your business, as you are. Because they're a corporate, you may find that their decision-making is slow, that it becomes quite bureaucratic. And I've seen lots of businesses where corporates invest in the entrepreneur's business, but it becomes frustrating after a period of time, because the entrepreneur feels, I'm actually quite constrained. So corporate can be slow movers on decision-making. And then finally, banks and institutional. I list them there, but they generally, banks typically will lend you money when you don't need it and not lend when you do. And institutional investors are typically investors of the last resort. They tend to get involved at a late stage of financing. So those are, and those are the primary ones. You may find other investors. But when you look at what investors are looking for, the first thing to remember is that each investor has a different requirement. And therefore, it's critical to understand, if you look at that list, what those specific investors are wanting for their investment. And it's not the same. So I think that's the first thing to bear in mind. When you reach out to an investor and you're saying, I've got a good business, or I've got an early stage business, or I've gotten it to a size where I need to scale it, you're wanting an investor, and you can go through that shopping list and choose one. But the key thing is, what do you want? And again, entrepreneurs are often not clear when they talk to investors about what they want. And this can lead to a significant source of conflict. So again, not a comprehensive list, but the starting point is, when you are engaging with an investor, it's important to match your goals with the investor goals. That's the key takeaway. Conflict often arises because the investor and the entrepreneur have different goals. So the entrepreneur has a long-term vision to build a big business. The investor may, if it's a private equity investor, have a view that we're going to invest for 5 years and then we're going to sell. And if that mismatch is not clarified up front, it leads to conflict. And then it potentially leads to a fallout. And over my years in business, I've seen many, many businesses where they have partners that they fight with, and they are unhappy about their partners. In the ad corp space, we're looking at an investment now where the entrepreneur sold part of the business a couple of years ago to a private equity player. And the private equity player has been putting pressure on the entrepreneur to deliver dividends. The entrepreneur wants to build his business and does not want to, from a capital allocation perspective, pay out dividends. They want to invest in the business. So you now have this conflict between the entrepreneur and the private investor. And that's now creating a situation where the entrepreneur has come to us as AdCorp and said, I can't get along with my partner. I actually just want to sell the entire business. I want to sell my share, and I've got a call option on my partner share, and I'd much rather just sell the business. So the failure to understand what your investor wants can lead to significant problems. And they are, again, not an exclusive or an exhaustive list. But the question you have to ask is, what do you want from the investor? And the answer is often, well, I want cash. But it's a little more nuanced than that. So you may want cash to grow. In that sense, you're approaching an investor to swap a portion of equity for cash, which you will then invest in the business in anticipation that you will make the business bigger. In a sense, the investor is lending you money. In return, you are underwriting that loan, if you like, with your equity. And what it does mean is that you will see a issue around control. You no longer have the complete control that you have. So investors are going to give you cash potentially, but you will sit with an issue of giving up partial control of your business. You may want an investor as a partner for technical expertise. In that case, it's not primarily the cash that you want, but you want access to the technical expertise to scale your business or to grow your business or further to expand your business. Again, if the investor is investing in anticipation that they are investing to make a financial return, but you are assuming that the investor is bringing their technical expertise, it will create conflict. So clarifying what your investor's goals are and what you want up front is really, really important. You may be wanting a channel to market. You may have a great product, but you can't get to market. And you may then look for an investor to take part of your business, but in return, you gain access to their channel. And this is particularly in the instance where you are trying to enter the retail market, and it's quite difficult to enter the formalized channels. I mean, it's really, really hard work. Those of you who are in that space will know it's many, many visits, many, many rejections. And sometimes you may want an investment where there is cash that the person is putting in, but it's actually the channel that you want access to. And then the final thing that entrepreneurs may want, and depending where you are in the maturity cycle, they may want a liquidity event. You may want a liquidity event. In other words, I, as the entrepreneur, I've spent a long time investing and growing this business. I've put my life savings in, I remortgaged my house, I've put all my time and my effort in. It's 4 or 5 years down the line, and you know what? I want to see a return on that. In which case, it's a liquidity event. You're selling part of your business, but it's less an investment and more a case of, well, I'm going to take the cash because that's my way of generating wealth. And you will see among those 4, and there may be others, among those 4 things that you as an entrepreneur want, they're all fundamentally different. And if you assume that your investor knows what you want, you must be very careful, because it can. Sorry, that's my phone and my watch talking back to me. If you wind up going into a situation where you think that the investor fully understands and you haven't clarified it, you're going to get conflict. So it's vitally important that when you talk to investors, as investors have spoken to me over many, many years, I often ask them, well, what do you want from us? What do you want from me? What are you expecting? So that's just a sense you have to be absolutely clear from a perspective of what do you want. What does your investor want? What are investors looking for? And we'll get to some further aspects of this in the next slide. The first thing, as much as you as an entrepreneur may want investment for multiple reasons, as much as there are different types of investors and they have different requirements, what do investors want? It's the same. All investors have different requirements. And therefore, it's very difficult to take a broad brush approach and say, all angel investors operate in this way, or equity investors operate in that way. Each investor's got their own requirements. And it's often the case that if you approach the wrong investor, you can wind up with a lot of time and effort and then realize they're actually not going to get the investment. A couple of years ago, I went to London to pitch the sale of a technology business to a company called Apis Partners. Apis Partners is a London-based private equity firm. And I flew to London. I managed to get a meeting with their partners. And I pitched the business, and I spent the morning with them. And I thought the pitch went really well. And a couple of days later, they phoned me and said, John, you know, the business that you pitched to us here in London from an investment perspective, and we weren't trying to sell the business. What we were trying to do was to get an equity investment so that we could grow the business. And they phoned me a couple of days later to say, John, we love the business. We think it's a fantastic business, but we're not going to invest. And I said, that's disappointing. It's not the first time that I pitched and been rejected, but tell me why. And they said, well, John, our ticket size, your business is too small. So sometimes if you don't fully understand what investors want, you could wind up doing a great pitch and get the answer that we got when I pitched a couple of years ago in London. They said, it's a great business, but it's too small for us. So it's crucial to understand before you chat to your potential investor, what are their requirements? In this case, we didn't know that their minimum ticket size was $50 million US. We were looking for an investment significantly less than that, in the sort of $15 million range. And they said, well, we only do investments $50 million and more. So I think that it was a lesson for me that one always needs to fully understand what investors want, but also the logistical requirements. What is their ticket size? What's their minimum investment tranche that they will make? What is their minimum holding period? What are their minimum returns? What are their control requirements? What are their reporting requirements? If you don't clarify all these things up front, you can potentially do a huge amount of work only to find that on one or two of those requirements, you've not fully understood it, and they actually won't invest. Ultimately, commercial investors are looking for a return. And that's something that entrepreneurs absolutely must remember. You may find the investor that likes you, and these are often private investors. They know you as a person, they want you to succeed. They're willing to put cash in and be a silent partner. Most corporate investors are not. Most private equity players are not. They are wanting a return. And this can sometimes be frustrating for entrepreneurs because they have not seen you from the idea, through the many long hours that you've put in, through the sacrifices that you've made, through the passion that you've got. They look at the numbers. And at the end of the day, they expect a return. And they expect a return at a particular point or after a period of time. Very few investors are going to say, well, I'm going to put money into your business, but one day I'll make a return. I don't know when that's going to be, but one day I'm going to make a return. There are very few investors that do that. Often investors are expecting a return because they've raised the capital themselves. One of the companies that I chair and started is a company called Nanak Capital Partners, and we invest in IT firms. And I started that private equity business a decade ago, and we invested in IT companies. And the frustration for me was the investment case was always a case of, well, John, we're going to pay dividends. And of course, our business raises capital from investors, and the investors want a return on their investment. And when those IT companies then are not able to pay a dividend, it creates friction between Nanuk and the management of that small business, where we say, well, we want a return, and they say, well, we can't because we're still growing the business. The other thing that investors look for, maybe the terminology is a bit awkward, but the term skin in the game is a crucial one. If you are asking someone to invest in your business, the first question they're going to ask is, well, what skin have you got in the game? What have you put in? Investors hate a differential risk profile. In other words, they put the money in, but their investment is at risk. And you as the entrepreneur, well, you actually don't have a big risk. They get very uncomfortable. Investors want to see that the entrepreneur or the management team have skin in the game. What does that mean? They're wanting to know if they lose their money because the business has floundered and not really been successful, what happens to you? Do you just throw your hands up and walk away and then start another business? Investors are very uncomfortable with that. They believe that if management has, or the entrepreneur has got skin in the game, that they stand to lose something, then the entrepreneur will manage their investment properly. So the other thing that they will look for is, what is your skin in the game? So when you talk to investors, you must make that clear so that investors know it's not a differential risk sharing model where they have all of the risk and you've got none. Very few investors are going to want to buy into that. Corporate investors, commercial investors are looking for a measure of control. And this is something that as entrepreneurs is the toughest thing that I've seen, and why so many investments go go pear-shaped. Because you've built this business, often over years, and you've put your heart and soul in it, and it's your baby, you're passionate about it. This is what you've wanted to do. You want the investment to grow the business, but you actually don't want to give up the control, because you don't want someone who's not put in the long hours and the sacrifice to tell you what to do. Your investors are going to want a measure of control. Probably the hardest thing philosophically or psychologically for an entrepreneur to deal with, because you actually give up control. And I've seen it in businesses that my company's invested in. When I sit on the board and I ask questions, and the entrepreneur goes, oh, we've always done it this way, John. Why are you asking this? So the issue of control can be quite frustrating for entrepreneurs who, until the investment, have free rein. But once you've made the investment, suddenly you've got people asking you questions. And especially if it's a significant investment, you may find that the agreement associated with that investment constrains some decision-making. That can be quite difficult. The other thing which investors look for, it's an odd one, and most entrepreneurs don't think about this, is actually a fit. It's a culture fit between your business and the investor. Why is that so important? I'll relate a story from my own experience. A couple of years ago, I was part of, not AdCorp, but my previous company. We looked to invest in a business in Dubai. And we flew out there, we met the owner and his management team. We went out for dinner, we spent 2 days with them. And I really liked the business. And the group CEO at the time, my boss, was with me. And after we'd spent 2 days with them, we left and he said to me, what do you think? And I said to him, I think it's a great business. And I think it'll be a fantastic fit. I think we should invest. And he said to me, I don't think so. And I said, why? The numbers look great. Everything looks great. And he said to me, I'll never forget, he said to me, you won't be able to manage this guy. This guy is going to be unmanageable. In fact, I don't think you can manage him. I don't think anyone, we never made the investment because the culture fit was not there. So when you're looking at your potential investor, don't only look at the check or the investment that they're willing to make. Look at whether these are people that you can work with, whether these are people you can get along with. My last company, before I joined AdCorp, our investors were French. They had invested in a private equity deal, but the culture fit between our French shareholders and our South African management team didn't fit, and it caused friction. And they exited the investment last year. So culture fit. When you look at your potential investor, ask yourself the question, is this someone that I can get along with? Is this someone I can work with? Because culture fit is probably, next to loss of control, the single biggest cause of friction between investors and entrepreneurs. The final slide I want to talk about is when you talk to an investor, we've spoken about the kinds of investor. We've spoken about what you want. We've spoken about potentially what the investor wants. There comes a point when you are talking to the investor, when you are pitching your investment. And it's at that point that investors want to see something. That's different to what they want. What they want is often a return on all those things we spoke about. But they make a decision not only on the numbers. So when you pitch, what do investors want to see? I would urge you all to look at, and you can get it on YouTube. I know it used to be on television. I don't necessarily watch television. Dragon's Den or Shark's Tank or whatever, where you have these reality TV shows where someone gets 30 seconds to pitch their idea and 4 or 5 potential investors look at them and ask them terrible questions and potentially treat them badly. That's the reality of pitching. If you're pitching to investors, they have competing businesses that they can potentially invest in. And even though there's oceans of cash in private equity, there's never been as much money in private equity hands as there is now. Even though there's an ocean of cash out there, private equity will not invest in a bad investment. They're not going to give you money simply because they have money. So what do they need to see? The second point is the most important point, I think. Ultimately, they are investing in you. You, the individual, oddly enough, not the business. And that's why this thing of culture is so important. What they're wanting to see when you pitch is, are you passionate? Is this passion for your idea coming across? Are you credible? Are you articulate? Do you have a vision? And what does your team look like? Because as much as the spreadsheets and the PowerPoint paints a picture, when you are in a meeting with them, they are making a decision as to whether to invest in you. So how you come across is absolutely key. The second thing that they're looking for is, do you have domain expertise or experience in the field in which you are running your business? And this is quite hard, because sometimes people have a passion and they leave corporate and they go do something completely different. And that can often work, but it can also fail. Many years ago, when I worked for Standard Bank, one of my employees decided that he wanted to open a burger restaurant, actually in the CBD. And he'd come from IT. He had a passion, and he opened a burger restaurant. And sadly, after 6 months, it folded. And it folded because he did not have the domain expertise or experience. And those things they're important, but they are really important when things start to go pear-shaped, when things go south. And your investors want to know that you've got the domain expertise or the experience to deal with the crises that will affect your business. Because the good times, we all know, we're living in COVID, the good times don't last forever. And your investor wants to know, A, that you've got the passion, but 2, you've got the expertise to get through the difficult times. They want to know that you know your customer. This is key. If you know your customer, then your investor will know or feel that maybe there's a proper market for your product or service. But if you're not able to talk about your customer in a way that the competing businesses can't, if you're able to demonstrate to your investor that you absolutely know your customer, and therefore your product or service is likely to meet an unmet demand in your customer, your investor is going to go, I'm not sure that there's a proper market for this. Again, back to investing in you, the person. And then the final thing investors need to see is they need to see a business, not an idea. One of the things which I've seen in my 25 years in business and being involved in buying and selling businesses over that time is something I call the hockey stick. Virtually every presentation where someone has come to one of my businesses or businesses I've been involved in, pitching for investment, you get the hockey stick. What do I mean by the hockey stick? The returns have been ordinary up until that point, but my word, over the next 5 years, are they going to shoot the lights out? That's not a credible story. And investors look at that and go, for the last 5 years, you've been going along at a slow rate of growth, but you're telling me that over the next 5 years, you're going to grow at 50% per annum. Your story that you pitch needs to be credible. They're looking to see a business and not necessarily an idea. So I think, Bertha, that for me gives an overview based on my years of doing business across Africa and having been on both sides for over many, many years. And hopefully that's given the participants a sense as to what are the things that investors are looking for. Mm. What's the key takeaway? They're investing in you. But I think from that side, that's the extent that I want to just share. In the time that we've got, I'm very happy to take questions from participants.
Great, thank you so much. Very to the point, but full of great nuggets and examples that you've shared there. We thank you so much, Dr. Wentzel. And we do have questions. I'll keep checking the chat room as well, but for new questions. But we had received questions from our participants, and those are the ones that we'll focus on. So you've answered most of them, so maybe you could just respond to the questions, also further reiterating the key areas that you would feel that the entrepreneurs need to take note. So our first question is, what can we do to stimulate private investment in the rural areas?
It's such a good question, and it doesn't have an easy answer. The problem with the rural areas, if you're looking at the corporate investment, they want in a return. The rural areas, and this is a global issue. It's not a South African or a Nigerian. It's an anywhere issue. is that rural inhabitants tend to be less well off than urban inhabitants. So that's the first challenge you sit with. The second challenge you sit with is logistics. The density in rural areas is a lot lower than in urban areas. So your concentration of customers is simply not there. So from an investment perspective, what you then find is alternative investments that are urban centric are more attractive. The risks associated with rural, I remember many years ago when I ran the post office, one of the big challenges that we found was we could not make a commercial case for opening a post office in a rural area because the turnover certainly wasn't there. So there's not an easy answer, but what I would think is if there's a compelling need that is being met, if there's a product or service that the rural can actually afford, and there is a business case, you will probably find investment. But I do think the stimulation, unfortunately, will be off the back of partnering with government, because government ultimately has a social obligation. And if one can potentially find state-owned entities, and because the state-owned entities have the cash, but they don't have the ideas. So it's maybe not an ideal answer, but I would say in the rural areas, one sadly needs to look at governmental or large entities that are willing to invest off the basis of meeting a social obligation. Otherwise, the commercials in the rural areas are really, really difficult.
Okay, so you know, that question was carrying on to say, so that we leverage on the vast land spaces and unskilled labor. So I guess they're referring to the fact that there is underutilized resources in the rural areas, and what can we do to tap into that?
But if I can just close very quickly on further expansion. You know, we've done some work with companies I worked for in Mozambique and in India when I was an academic in India and in South Africa. So agriculture lends itself to rural. The problem that you sit with is not using rural areas to drive agricultural production. The problem that those entities invariably sit with is access to market. So you've got to solve the access to market channel, because asking someone to develop a small subsistence farm and then hoping that the product will enter the commercial mainstream, that's quite hard. So access to market is something that rural areas battles with. If you can solve the access to market, then I think you've got a good start to that. Thanks.
Yes. Yes, great. Thank you very much. The next one, maybe you could share from your vast experience, is where do we find investors? Is there a one-stop shop? Maybe you could share in the different countries where people can find investors.
I'm not going to do it now. I actually, in preparing this, I actually took a screenshot of I think it's South Africa, where there are online places that are willing to provide investment. And actually, sorry, I didn't take that screenshot because that would have given you at least one address. So what I will do, Bertha, with your permission, I'll send that through to you, and then you can share an example with the participants. So there are a couple of ways. What I would suggest to all of you, if you're seeking to raise investment, Google search it, because a lot of the investors are now online, where you can find, and when I share it with Bertha, she'll share it with you, and then you can see that's one example of an online portal that brings together businesses seeking investment and investors. And there you pitch your idea. It's a bit like crowdsourcing. So you pitch your idea, and investors can then evaluate that idea, and then there's a way in which they can contact you. So that's one channel. Private equity players, again, are listed, and private equity players are always willing to listen. Apis Partners is one that comes to mind. They're based in London, and you can Google them. So I would say 2 or 3. One, spend time on the internet, and you can potentially find places that's willing to invest. There are business accelerators, and I can talk from a South African perspective. A colleague of mine, Pablo Fatidis, runs a crowd out from Rosebank, where they, and again, he's online. You can Google Pablo Fatidis, ORIC. So they're called ORIC, and they've got a website, and you can approach them and say, listen, I've got a great idea. How do I get investment? So that would be my sense. You'll probably find stuff like that in each country. They may be slightly different. In some cases, we have government entities or state-owned entities that can assist. In South Africa, there's the small business development center or whatever. That's a government-funded entity, and you will find them in other countries as well. So I would say spend some time on the internet, Googling. You will probably find various entities that can assist and that you can approach for investment.
Great. Great, thank you. So I will share the slide when you send it. Let me move back to the chat. So Immaculate has asked, so I'll give you these two. Immaculate has asked for a quick definition of what is liquidity. And Kenneth is asking, how can I attract investors in the manufacturing space? I manufacture curtain rods locally and expanding to accessories.
Okay, so let's answer the first question, which is quite straightforward. So liquidity is about cash. Liquidity is cash. It means when you're liquid. A liquidity event and sorry, I'm speaking investor speak, so I apologize if I've used words that you may not be familiar with. A liquidity event is where you take your investment and you turn it into cash. So if you've got a business and you believe the business is worth $1,000 and you spent 5 years building it, and you now want to see cash in your bank account because you've mortgaged your house, you've used up your pension, and you need to replenish that, then the liquidity event, that's the term, is selling part of the business, and you take the cash, you don't invest it in the business, but you take it in your personal capacity, and you then redeem your pension or you settle whatever loans you took. So that's a liquidity event. Going back to the question of how do I get investment for my business? The manufacturing is quite hard. And the key there is, what are you bringing to market that is differential in that space that you can take to a potential investor? The challenge is always where you start a business, and I'm not saying this is in your case, I'm using the generic one, is where you start a business and it is a commodity business. If you start in a commodity business, in other words, there's so many of them out there, it's incredibly hard to get investment or to get access to market, because you will take a product and go to the retailer and go, I'd like to list my product. And the retailer goes, well, I've already got 10 suppliers for curtain rods. Why must I have 11? So I think when you're looking for that, what you need to find is what's the unmet need that your specific product is bringing to market. Once you've got an element of uniqueness, you then have a pitching story that you can take to an investor. Once you've got an investor, then it becomes easier to attack the channel to market. And the channel to market is, I would say, in the manufacturing, probably the hardest thing to do. There's no easy answer there. My colleague who wasn't able to join me today would have spoken about that as well. Would probably have said, you're knocking on a lot of doors. You must expect a lot of rejection. But if you are an entrepreneur, then you will know that that's not going to deter you. So it's maybe not the answer that you want, but I would say in summary, your product, whether it's curtain rods or accessories, what differentiates it from what's already out there? Get that clear in your mind. What's going to make the customer choose you over someone else? Once you've got that clear, then potentially you can go to an investor, if that's where you're going, and say to the investor, I've got something unique. I've got something that few other people have. I mean, it doesn't have to be something fancy. It could just be, I've got a channel that no one else has used, or I'm accessing a market that no one else has accessed.
Wow, thank you very much. Our next question is, how do you approach these investors? How do you get them interested? And how do you structure a proposal to investors? I personally feel your presentation covered this. And what I caught was, all have different requirements. So take note to see what your investor wants. They want a return. They want skin in the game. They want a measure of control, and culture fit is very important. And what do they want to see? I picked up, they want to, what do they need to see that you are investable? You know, people can invest in you, and you know your customer. I think you've just covered that in the last second. You know your customer, and you have domain expertise and experience. So I'll move on for the sake of our time to a question in the chat room. And please, Dr. Wentzel, feel free to pick up on those ones as well, once again. But the one from this, where do I find angel investors? I think you've covered that one in terms of where do we find investors. The next one is, do customer databases count for much as a business asset from the investor's viewpoint? Do customer databases count for much as a business asset from the investor's viewpoint?
Yeah, so the sad answer is no. So when you look at an asset, especially for a business, the harsh reality that as an entrepreneur you're going to face is someone's going to invest and they're going to want to know, okay, is my investment at risk? If it all goes pear-shaped and the business does not succeed and you're forced into liquidation, are there assets that's saleable that I can get some of my money back? You will find that customer databases is not saleable and therefore doesn't constitute an asset. So you will find that any bank's going to look at that and go, that does not constitute collateral for a loan. So I think the best way to look at an asset in your business is to say, is it something that a bank would take as a guarantee for the loan? And a database, unfortunately, is not.
Great. One very popular one, which is always important to keep answering, is investors for value. So I think this one also has to do with value. How do you determine the value of a company?
That is probably a talk all on its own. So my experience is the following. Entrepreneurs always overvalue their business. And that's not because they are not intelligent. What they do is they take into account all of the time, the effort, the sacrifice, the investment that they've made up front, which is sunk, and you don't necessarily see that. Most times, and it's a very crude measure, and it causes frustration for entrepreneurs, and that's why choosing your investors is so important. When we buy businesses, we look at something called the price to earnings multiple. And if your business is not making money, then for a lot of investors, they're going to go, well, you're not making any money. I can't value the business. So the crudest way that companies value business is something called price to earnings, and they pay a multiple of that. So let's suppose your business makes $100,000 per annum in earnings. That's how much profit you make. And you want an investment. What the corporate or what the investor will do is the investor will say, in that sector that you are in, businesses trade or get bought and sold at a price to earnings multiple of 4, which means your business is worth $400,000. And therefore, that's what I value the business. For the entrepreneur, you may go, but my business is worth a lot more because I've already invested $500,000, which you can't see. And my business is going to grow. So in 5 years' time, it's going to be worth $5 million. Investors, unfortunately, generally don't take that into account. It's the single biggest cause of frustration for entrepreneurs when they go, but how can it be worth $400,000? I've already put $600,000 in. It's a very crude measure. Unfortunately, it is the measure that most private equity players and corporates look at.
Great. Our last question from the question sent earlier on was, I think we had about 10 questions from there. You've just answered it. I think it's how do you keep investors interested when you cannot yet track your sales yet? So I think you've responded to that one. For the sake of time, we'll move on to our last question for tonight, and I would like to thank everyone who sent questions. I would like to know what role an investment plays in a social enterprise, and how would someone be able to navigate that space of getting investment when they're in the social enterprise?
Yeah, it's a slightly different question. At the start of my presentation, I specifically said I would focus my talk on the corporate, although the social is quite different. Your social investor is potentially someone, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a good example of that. And I'm going to use them as an example. In their portfolio, they are trying to solve social problems. If your social enterprise is aligned to solving that problem, whether it is malaria eradication, whether it is, my brother-in-law lives in Mozambique, he treats leprosy, whether it's trying to address issues of leprosy. If you align your business with the broad investment criteria of whether it's the World Bank, whether it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There are many of those. So that's one way to look at that. The second thing, which I've seen in my experience, and I saw this in India, if your business is only based on donations as its source of survival, it's not going to last. You have to get the business to a self-sustaining basis. So when you look at the social component, you have to work out how do you get this thing to be commercially at least break even, because long term you get donator fatigue. So you may be able to start the business with donations, addressing the social problem, but in 2 or 3 years' time, those donors are going to want to move on to another project. And I've seen many of these social businesses fail when their primary donor leaves. So you've got to also have something that is ultimately self-sustaining.
Great. Thank you very much. Definitely someone is commenting. If you don't know your if you don't know your audience, you don't know what to sell. And maybe the last question I'm seeing there is, please speak about investors interested in assisting technology innovations. I think Dr. Wentzel himself has shown that he's interested in fintech and IT companies, and he will share more information when he sends more about responding to the question about the one-stop shop for investors. We've come to the end. Our time is up. Once again, please, I wish online events, we can't give you a large, but I just want you to imagine a loud applause. Thank you very much for your very informative and insightful presentation. I enjoyed the examples and your experiences and your expertise that you've gained from your engagements across the world. Very, very valuable to our entrepreneurs who are upcoming, who are at idea stage. And I know that we are going to have more of you. We are running this series until September. So I do hope you come back. Thank you very much for your precious time that you've taken to come on board. I know you've had a hectic weekend. I've been on your case the whole weekend. I thank you for coming through. We'd also want to wish Dr. Nkwaira, who was supposed to join us this evening. He is not well. We pray that he gets well very soon. Unfortunately, he could not join us. He was not well, but I know that definitely in the next series he'll join us. There's someone who had asked how to pitch to investors. How do I structure my proposal to investors? And that is our next session for next week on Tuesday, same time. Please join us, where we will once again bring to you experienced experts in the industry who will come and talk to you about how to pitch, and we'll also bring on board our E4Impact faculties from across Africa and the world to come and share with you on how to pitch to investors and how to structure your pitch to investors. So please join us next week on Tuesday, 6 to 7, and please share the word, and so that we can grow the vision together of building the largest alliance of partners and impact entrepreneurs across Africa. Please stay safe, and thank you very much. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. If you have any more questions, you can put them in our chat room. Thank you very much.